As I mentioned last week, it's hard to finish the story of Jacob without looking, for a little bit anyway, at the life of Joseph, because they intersect, and we're going to look at Joseph's life fairly quickly, like skipping a rock across a pond. Here we're going to hit some highlights today, but we're not going to get into all the detail that you remember, and then we're going to bring Jacob back in at the end of the story and look at the two of them more next week. I've never loved the word victim, but Joseph was a victim. I mean, he did some things to inflame his brother's jealousy, for sure. Probably shouldn't have talked about those dreams he was having. Probably shouldn't have worn the coat out to the wilderness when he went to visit them. Okay. But you don't sell family into slavery. I mean, that seems a bit extreme. First to talk about killing him, and then to sell him into slavery. That by any stretches is in poor form. Yes? So we're going to jump into Joseph's life after he is sold into slavery in Egypt. On your sheet, we'll have a few summary statements along the way. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, his first son through the wife he loved, Rachel. Joseph's story is found in Genesis 37 through 50. After Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery, they deceived Jacob, whose name meant deception. Yes, the irony is not lost on us. Into thinking that his favorite son had been slain by wild animals. Joseph was taken to Egypt, where he was then sold to a high-ranking Egyptian named Potiphar, and eventually became the supervisor of Potiphar's household. So, we pick up the story in Genesis chapter 39. You are there in your Bible, and as you can see, we're going to read those that I put in bold print on your sheet and move through his situation as a young man fairly quickly. Genesis 39 and verses 2 through 6. And there's going to be a phrase that is very important there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in his house and in the field. So, Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Okay, here is a young man in a foreign land. I mean, think about the challenges that he had to overcome very quickly, the culture that he didn't know, the country that he didn't know, the language that he didn't understand. He's gone from favored son to household slave. What was the secret of his success?
The Lord blessed him.
How many times did it say that in those verses? Did you catch it?
Several.
Goodness. I count 1 in verse 2. I count 1 in verse 3. Actually, 2 in verse 3. I count at the end of verse 5, the blessing of the Lord. Is that 4 times in 5 verses? The Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. What was the secret of his success? What is the secret of your success? The Lord. The Lord. Now, we don't have any idea of how long he was in this household. There's no mention of time. Was it 2 months? Was it 2 years? It's hard to speculate. But something happens. Something happens. Seems like a good situation for Joseph until... Oh, lovely woman. Unfortunately, Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce Joseph. Joseph refused her advances, showing honor for his master, who had entrusted him with so much, and demonstrating obedience to God. In her anger, she falsely accused Joseph of attempted rape, and Potiphar put him in prison. Picking up the story in verse 16, same chapter. She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me, but as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. When his master heard the story his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me," he burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Stop there. Why, if this is a false accusation, why do you suppose Joseph did not protest his sentence?
Well, he was a slave. He didn't have any authority.
No authority, no rights.
He would have believed his wife.
What's that?
He would have believed his wife.
Probably. But Nancy, I'm going to speculate here, okay? This is not Bible, but just trying to understand and connect the dots. I think there was probably a little bit of doubt in Potiphar's mind because he didn't have the Hebrew slave killed.
Right.
And he saw how God had blessed him.
And he saw how God had blessed him. And I suspect that his wife's behavior, perhaps up to this point, might have put just a little bit of doubt. Maybe it's not exactly as she says, and that's why Joseph ends up in prison instead of...
And his cloak was there.
His cloak was there.
It's not really how it happened, but there was that evidence.
Yes, but he's not there, and she could have moved it. He was angry, but what happens if Joseph forces the issue? Her word versus his. Wife versus slave. There's no good way to come out of this. Yeah. By the way, I don't think the woman loved him. Just saying. I mean, if she's going to tell a lie about him, I don't think she loved him.
Joseph, you talking about she didn't love Joseph?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah.
When they said he was dark and handsome,
Yeah.
that she just liked his looks.
She did like his looks.
He was young. You don't know how old Potiphar was.
Mm. So, for a second time, Joseph's comfortable life had been stolen from him by people with evil intent. I mean, the guy just can't seem to catch a break here. His brothers sell him into slavery. He ends up in a decent situation, and from there, he's in prison. He's in prison. What does it say about human depravity and God's sovereignty?
We bump heads.
Have you ever been done wrong?
Accused of something you didn't do.
Accused of something?
Yes.
Have you ever been affected by somebody else's sin? You trust God, but you don't trust people. Not everybody, anyway. So when people are ugly and you end up in prison, metaphorically, is God still in control?
We don't know what the end is going to be.
No, we don't. But we can sure get hurt and angry when other people's evil actions have a bearing on us.
You don't really have to look very hard for human depravity in the world we live in right now.
The heart is wicked and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Yeah. Our sin definitely has a bearing on everybody else and vice versa. But God is still in control. God is still sovereign. And even in this situation, same chapter, second part of verse 20. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. Keep that in mind, okay? The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. What phrase appears again?
The Lord was with him.
The Lord's with you.
Did you see it twice in those verses? Did you see it at the first part of verse 2 in this chapter? The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. Can I ask you a question? Why? Why was the Lord with Joseph? At least two reasons are right. Two answers.
He's with all of us if we are his.
If what?
If we follow him or we are under his.
If we seek to honor him, he's going to be with us. Joseph did seek to honor the Lord.
But the Lord also had a plan. And it was not for that immediate moment, but it was going. He had to go through this to get to where he needed to be.
The plan involved the family. Remember, this is the point. God chose one family to bless the world. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And so the Lord was with him also because that was just his prerogative. This is what he chose to do. So two parts of this. Joseph is honoring God, but also God had a bigger plan in mind. So last week in the evening group, Joe Cox said something that I've been thinking about for 7 days, and he might be right. I like it when someone throws out a thought that I haven't had about the scripture before. He said, it might have been to Joseph's advantage to be sold into slavery and then grow up in Egypt instead of in that dysfunctional family. Because, you saw everything else that had happened and all of those boys had done. They were rotten. Can you imagine if he had been forced to grow up in that circumstance? Instead, he is taken out and over here. Now, bad things happen, but these bad things might not be as bad as those bad things.
But even though bad things happen to him, a lot of really good things happen to him as well.
That's true.
He's in a bad situation, but he's got the best of the bad situation.
He does have the best of the bad. Yeah.
And God uses Joseph to get his family back together.
He does. But it takes some...
Even though they treated him badly.
Yeah.
Well, you started out saying that he was a victim, but
Yeah.
really, although these things were done to him, he didn't wallow in, for me that this has been done to him.
I don't think that first day in prison was great for him.
No, but he kept on going because he could have.
Yes.
He didn't have to do a good job in Potiphar's house.
Right.
And he didn't have to do a good job in the jail.
You're exactly right.
He
He could have been woe is me in both situations. Yeah. You're right.
So I think of it more as a victor rather than a victim.
What makes the difference? His faith, his attitude?
His attitude.
Yeah.
And moving forward, you can't do anything about what just happened.
Yeah. In jail, Joseph was blessed by God. Though we're not given the details of their offenses, Joseph's fellow prisoners were the king's cupbearer and baker. Interesting. So we're going to move into chapter 40. Let's read verses 4 through 7. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today? We both had dreams." But his question, why do you look so sad today? He's now in his late 20s. What does his question to them imply about his character and his relationship with these men? What kind of person is Joseph?
Empath.
Caring. What's that?
Empath.
Empathetic. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. These are not his people. These are not his relatives. And yet he does have concern for them. Maybe as somebody who had been treated unfairly, that gave him a little bit more mercy towards others. Okay, verse 8. We both had dreams, they answered, but there is no one to interpret them. Bum, bum, bum. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams. Given his history, Joseph's history, why is this situation providential?
Bad dreams.
He's gonna get out of jail because of it.
He's a dreamer.
Yeah.
He's a dreamer. He has had these meaningful dreams that indicate what's going to happen in the future. Now other people are having dreams too. Guess what? I'm a bit of an expert in these things. And as Nancy says, God has, in God's great plan, he's got to get Joseph from point A to point B. And the only way to get from point A to point B is through prison. That's the only way that he is going to become acquainted with the Pharaoh. I know, it's a terrible situation, but there's no other way. You know, it's like the hero in the adventure movies, and he comes to the edge of the cliff, and there's the other edge of the cliff, and the only way across is that rickety wooden rope bridge.
It always breaks in the middle when you're on it.
Yes, but he doesn't die. There's only one way to get from point A to point B. Kind of a lousy method, but God knows in his providence, in his sovereignty, this has got to happen.
If he had stayed in Potiphar's house, he wouldn't have had the authority that the king ended up giving him.
No.
And so he had to get out, but
If he had stayed in Potiphar's house, he has a very domestic life until he dies. Comfortable, but
not divine.
not divine. Joseph interpreted the dreams of his fellow prisoners. Both interpretations proved to be true, and one of the men was later released from jail and restored to his position as the king's cupbearer. But the cupbearer forgot about Joseph and failed to speak to Pharaoh about him. 2 years later, the king himself had some troubling dreams, and the cupbearer remembered Joseph's gift of interpretation. The king summoned Joseph and related his dreams. Based on Pharaoh's dreams, Joseph predicted 7 years of bountiful harvests, followed by 7 years of severe famine in Egypt, and advised the king to begin storing grain in preparation for the coming shortage. As a reward for his wisdom, Joseph was made a ruler in Egypt, second only to the king. Joseph was in charge of storing up food during the years of plenty and selling it to the Egyptians and foreigners during years of famine. So he gets promoted. He gets out of jail. Verse 41. Chapter 41 and verse 41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as the second in command, and people shouted before him, Make way! Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Wow.
He told his brothers he was special.
He did. But maybe he should have kept that one to himself. Yeah. How much time has passed between the time that his brothers sold him into slavery and the time that he is put in charge here? Anyone know? 13 years. 13 years. You're going to see in a few minutes. He's 30 years old now. So Potiphar's house, prison, at least 2 more years after this. Somehow it adds up to 13 years. So he's still a fairly young man. Given the king's ring, what does the ring signify?
Authority.
Authority, power, yes. It's like he has the stamp. Now, anything that he says, the king has said. He represents the king in all matters. What part did Joseph play in his own promotion to second in the land? What part did he play?
Well, he used the gift God gave him because he was an interpreter of dreams.
Yeah, but do you remember what he said to them when they brought the dreams? He said,
God.
interpretations belong to God.
Well, that's what I mean. It was a gift. I hope I do not have the gift of dreaming. I hope none of the dreams I dream have any significance because they're usually bad.
What is Joseph doing during these 13 years? The only part that he's playing in his own promotion is he's just being faithful. That's it.
He's being pruned.
He is being pruned. But you don't apply as a Hebrew slave to be second in command in the whole land of Egypt. You know, they don't put that out there on the job board. God moved him. God moved him. We continue, verse 44. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all of Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, to be his wife. Okay, you're marrying this woman. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was, here it is. You see it? 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. So, again, still a fairly young man. Given his past, what effect do you suppose Joseph's promotion had on his ego? I think he stays humble.
Yeah,
Because-
he should be amazed because that is an amazing journey.
And once you've learned that life can turn on a dime, once you've learned that you can be on top and all of a sudden you're on bottom, once you've experienced a few things like that, you recognize things are out of your control. That you can do your very best. In seminary, I was working at a church, but I was also working at a custom frame shop. And it basically kept this shop open. It was always just me and the manager. And went through 2 managers. And at one point, a third one came in, and I was basically doing all of the work. And then the business was sold, and 2 lawyers from Houston bought the business, and I took a little bit of time off. I was away from a week, and when I came back on a Monday, they said, we don't need you anymore. We're going to roll up our sleeves, and we're going to learn the craft. And I'm like, with all due respect, all of the customers know me. Now, I'm the one who literally does every bit of work that goes out of the shop. I don't think you're going to have the time and energy to devote to doing the work. I mean, we're in Fort Worth and they're lawyers from Houston. But I was let go. Listen, I needed the money. I needed the money. I needed that job. Now, within a week, I did find another job, and it was actually better pay, and I ended up being a tutor at a college nearby. They called 2 weeks later and asked me to come back. It's too late. It's too late. I didn't do anything wrong. I was doing everything right, and then I was out. If you ever had an experience like that, you know what I'm talking about. Life can turn. So I guarantee you, every single day, Joseph was counting his blessings. Given his past, what type of leader would you expect Joseph to become?
Well, he would have been trustworthy.
Definitely a trustworthy leader. Definitely.
And he would have compassion.
And he would have compassion for people. Yeah, he's shown that over the past 13 years for sure.
He's also wise because he's not just getting it from his own brain.
There is some wisdom that comes with these experiences, for sure. Verse 47, same chapter. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city he put the food grown into the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. At 30 years old, I ask you, and there's two answers. Where did Joseph's maturity, experience, administrative ability, and management skills come from? Where did... that's okay. That's a fine one. I'm thinking of
Well, like his job with Potiphar.
Potiphar's house and
jail and the
prison.
Yeah.
In these places, he was learning. He was put in charge.
But God put him in those places.
God did put him in those places. Absolutely. You're right. But think again, if he had grown up in Canaan with his brothers, would he ever been in charge of anything?
He didn't even go out and work in the fields.
No. Number 11?
He was sporting that coat.
Been home playing video games.
Yeah, exactly. So these experiences that God put him through prepared him for something much bigger. It reminds me of young David. You know, when he goes out to fight Goliath and he says to Saul, I fought the lion and I fought the bear and I can fight this giant. That God has prepared him for something greater. God, in his infinite wisdom, had done this. These two things that he thought were stop-offs were actually management training programs. Verse 50. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. How do the names of his sons give us insight into his mindset at this point in time? Where is his head?
Honoring God. Giving God the credit.
Absolutely. He is giving God the credit. He sees God in all of the circumstances. So I'm listening to Christian radio on my way to a church this morning, and somebody says, I don't even remember who it was, but sometimes they put these little short clips from different preachers. Your past does not have to be your prison. We learn from it. We're redeemed. We grow from it. Joseph recognizes that the bad things that happened to him, 1, 2, these were not, he kept his faith. He kept his attitude. Very positive attitude. Verse 53. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and then 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. So besides exalting Joseph, who else did God bless through his faithfulness?
The Egyptians.
And more. The Egyptians and more who were coming. If God doesn't put Joseph in charge, then things go really poorly for everybody. There's death. Meanwhile, back in Canaan, your last sheet, chapter 42. When Jacob learned, by the way, at least 20 years have passed now, because remember 13, because he's 30 and he's in charge, and then 7 years of plenty, that's 20, and now there's famine. So we're a little over 20 years since he was sold into slavery. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" that's a great statement. What? Oh my gosh. He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." What a card he is. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Gee, I wonder why he'd think that.
He sent the disposable sons.
Yeah. The organ donors.
Not the favorites.
No. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. So again, as best as we can tell, 20 years or 20 years plus, depending on when they started to feel the pinch, had passed since Joseph was sold into slavery. What was going on in the life of Joseph's family in Canaan? How are they doing? They're hungry. They're alive but not well. They are hungry. Now, the good thing is, now Jacob is back in the promised land. He always knew he was supposed to go back. God told him, "You will go back to the land." He did get back to the land. That's good. But now that he's there, not all is well. Poor Jacob. What's going on in Joseph's life in Egypt?
He's in charge of all the food.
Hail the conquering hero. Yes, yes. He is second in command and in charge of everything as far as distribution of grain. Now, if 20 plus years have passed, I want you to think about this because Joseph could not stalk his family on social media. Right? And they're not sending letters back and forth either. All this time has passed. They don't know anything about his life and what became of it. Do they still think about him? Yes, they do. I'm going to prove it in a few minutes. Does he still think about them? You remember what he just named one of his sons? Remember how he explained it? Because of the suffering from my family, my household. So they think about each other. But decades have passed. And they don't know. They don't know. Verse 6. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Why do you suppose Joseph did not reveal himself to his brothers at this time?
Doesn't work out very well if you know who he is.
Maybe you get an idea of what they're like now. Have they changed? Are they still?
He wants to gather some information. He wants to see if they're still the same horrible individuals. You know this has got to be a shocking day. You know when he gets up this morning, after more than 20 years, he does not expect to see.
How do you think he recognized them but they didn't recognize him?
I have many theories. Anybody want to answer that question?
Well, he
'Cause it's
looked
gonna-
like an Egyptian by now. He did.
Oh,
And, you know,
He was 17.
Right.
And they
Now
sent
he's
him to
more like
slave.
40. And what's that?
He sent it to the Pharaoh, so he's probably dressed fine.
Right.
They sold him as a slave, so they don't expect him to be in a position of prominence.
Yes, that's the last person they would expect.
And they were older.
Oh,
and
they
you
were
don't
older, so
change
it doesn't
that.
change as
No, you don't
much.
change that much.
Yes, yes.
Any of us that have worked in an elementary school and then see these
See
people.
people 20 years later,
and
they're like,
do you remember me? And you go, yes. Yeah, remind me of your name. They don't look anything like they did.
No, you're exactly right. And this is happening to me with like some of Elena's friends that she grew up with, and now like they're at Anderson together, and she's making these old acquaintances from when they were 5 and 6, you know, in Charleston. And she's like, look, Dad, you recognize this person? No. Do you remember so-and-so? That's their granddaughter. Oh, still don't see it. No, enough time has passed. He's changed. He's changed. They, on the other hand, are still...
A group. Sometimes you do recognize people by the group.
That's true.
Yeah. Sure.
Jane, there's 10 of them.
Sure to recognize.
So if you don't recognize one or two, come on now. And they may have aged also, but they are still shepherds. They are still wearing the same old, same old. And
Nobody's wearing his coat.
when he hears them, yeah, exactly. When he hears them speaking, they are speaking Hebrew. What is he speaking?
Egyptian.
Egyptian. So again, they're not going to connect the dots quickly. He's even speaking a different language. Yeah. If Lois Lane could never figure out that Clark Kent was Superman, you know.
And that they were never in the room at the same time.
Right, right. Okay. So he's talking to his brothers. He's gathering information. Verse 8, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. No, my lord, they answered. Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. He's thinking, honest men. No, he said to them, you have come to see where our land is unprotected. But they replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. That's very interesting. And how they describe their family history. Joseph said to them, it is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies. And he put them all in custody for 3 days. Okay, look at verse 13. What 3 important pieces of information did his brothers reveal? Very important to him. Again, because he does not have...
That Jacob is alive.
1, Dad is still alive. That would have been on the forefront of his mind, probably for years now. What happened to Dad? Dad is still alive. That's huge. That's huge. What else?
Little brother is still alive.
Little brother is alive. This is his only full brother. Same mother, same father. All the rest are half-brothers. Little brother's still alive. What else? One is no more. One is
Oh,
no
yeah,
more.
they think he's dead.
But there's a second part of that. They think he's dead, but he's still a part of the family history. See, that gets me.
Forgotten.
Why volunteer that information? I mean, it's one thing to clarify, there's Dad and we left one brother behind, but why add? I mean, why is this pertinent? See, this is what I said a few minutes ago. They still think about him. They still think about him. Was Joseph being unfair to his brothers? Was he being vindictive or something else? Cautious. He remembered his dreams about them, verse 9. He remembered his dreams. In the moment, here's what I get. He sees God's hand in it. He remembered his dream. Now, he doesn't know what to do exactly. He doesn't know how this is going to play out in the moment. But he recognizes God's hand in it. That says a lot about Joseph. Anybody understand in here completely how God works day in and day out? Anybody? Have you got God figured out yet? No. But when you have that moment, that meeting, that coincidental divine appointment, you see God's hand in it. What does God want to do here? By the way, if he keeps them in jail, he spent 2 years there plus. So I guess that's nothing. That's nothing. Verse 18, home stretch. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "Do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." This they proceeded to do. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother.
Guilty conscience.
We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life." I don't remember that in the original, right? But they knew it. But we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us. Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy?" They are still hashing out what happened more than 20 years earlier. They're still arguing about it. "But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." Does that answer your question a little better, Nancy? They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. So even though 20 years had passed, what does the brothers' conversation reveal about their conscience? Guilty. They feel guilty. They have been carrying this guilt around all this time. Do you feel just a little bit happy about that? A little bit? Verse 25. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack and give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank, and they turned to each other trembling and said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. They said, "The man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men. We are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan.' Then the man who is the Lord over the land said to us, 'This is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me, and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me, so I will know you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the land.' As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened." Wow. What does this unfortunate find reveal about their faith? Did you catch it? Did you catch how they related to God at the end of verse 28? Who is God to them? Punisher. God is a punisher. God is the one who gets you back for the things that you've done. This is not entirely accurate, but this is how they viewed God, probably because of their, guilty consciences. Because they had not made peace with what they had done. Final verses. 36. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin? Everything is against me." Consistent, isn't it? Then Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back." But Jacob said, "My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left." Doesn't that hurt? Those 10 brothers, can you imagine Dad saying that? What are we, chopped liver? "If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." Wow.
All that Jacob.
Again! Thank you for seeing that. You remember how every point along the way, me. Remember they destroyed the town? You've made them enemies of me. It's always me, me, me. And even here, Simeon is locked up. And what does Jacob say? Poor old me. Poor old me. Do you have a different translation, by the way, at the end of verse 36? Everything is against me. A terrible statement. You got son, Joseph, the apple has fallen far from the tree. Here he is going through these things, has a positive attitude, maintains his faith, even in trial. And dad is the most pessimistic guy.
I think that answers Joe Cox's question, don't you? That he was better off not being in this.
Eventually he figures it out.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, he was better off. So what do Jacob and his sons not yet know about their hopeless situation? What do they not yet know?
Joseph is alive, he's the one,
And not only is he alive, but what?
he's the one holding all the cards.
And this is to their benefit.
Because they moved.
This is going to be to their benefit. What they don't recognize about their hopeless situation is that it's not hopeless.
Because God is a God of provision, not.
Yes. So, and I'll close with this. I realize that we're out of time. When something goes wrong in our lives, tell me if this is accurate. When something goes wrong, our immediate response is usually negative because we tend to view the situation horizontally instead of vertically. Right? Something goes wrong, we say, in the words of Jacob, everything is against me. The whole universe is against me.
And yet God provided for them even though they were guilty.
He did. He would. But right now, they're not looking like this. They're looking like this. And whenever your eyes are only like this, you can feel very, very hopeless. Jacob, child of the promise, is everything really against you? Christian, is there ever a time in your life in which everything is against you? No. Look up. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Let's pray together. Father, we do once again praise you for your mysterious ways, for your providence in our lives. We recognize that we don't see the end from the beginning, that sometimes we can get pretty discouraged. What a great reminder, Lord, that you are always working behind the scenes, even when we can't see you working. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.